Susan Marie Powell, née Cox, born October 16, 1981, is an American missing person from West Valley City, Utah, whose disappearance and suspected murder in December 2009 garnered national media attention. Her husband, Joshua Powell, was named by law enforcement as a person of interest in the case, but was never charged. Joshua killed himself and the couple's two young sons in February 2012 after custody of the boys had been given to Susan's parents. West Valley City Police closed their active investigation into Susan's disappearance in May 2013, stating their belief that Joshua killed Susan and that his brother Michael, who died by suicide in February 2013, aided him in concealing her body. Since then, there have been repeated attempts to have Susan legally declared dead. Joshua Powell was born on January 20th, 1976, to Stephen and Terica Powell in Puyallup, Washington. He had two brothers, Michael and John, and two sisters, Jennifer and Alina. The Powell household was deeply dysfunctional due to Stephen's abusive behavior and his disaffection with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church. According to divorce filings by Teresa in 1992, Stephen shared pornography with his sons and refused to teach or enforce limits on certain behaviors. As a teenager, Joshua allegedly killed gerbils belonging to one of his sisters and threatened his mother with a butcher knife. He also attempted suicide on at least one occasion. By the late 1990s, Joshua was living in Tacoma as a student at the University of Washington. It was here that he began a relationship with a woman named Catherine Terry Everett, whom he met at a local LDS church congregation. After the two moved into an apartment together, Joshua exhibited possessive behavior towards Everett. She later recalled he refused to allow her to visit her family by herself and added, "He would have restrictions and limitations on what I could and couldn't do when it came to my family." When Everett visited a friend in Utah without Joshua, she decided not to return to Washington and broke up with him over the phone. Joshua met Susan Cox, a classmate at his LDS Church Institute of Religion course, during a dinner party at his Tacoma apartment in November 2000. The two began a relationship and married in the Portland, Oregon temple in April 2001. Joshua obtained a bachelor's degree in business and worked for a number of different companies over the subsequent decade. Susan, a trained cosmetologist, took up a job with Wells Fargo Investments after the family relocated to West Valley City, Utah, a suburb of Salt Lake City. The Powells had two sons, Charles, born on January 19, 2005, and Braden, born on January 2, 2007. For a brief period following their wedding, Joshua and Susan lived with her father-in-law, Stephen, in South Hill, Washington. Stephen developed an obsessive infatuation with Susan and followed her around the house with a camcorder, used a small mirror to spy on her while she used the bathroom, stole underwear from her laundry, read her journals, and posted love songs online under a pseudonym. In 2003, Stephen confessed his amorous feelings to Susan, who rejected him. The encounter was inadvertently captured by Stephen's camcorder microphone. The Powells moved out of state soon after, partly so Susan could distance herself from Stephen. Susan's journal entries and email correspondence indicated the presence of marital discord. 10. There was tension with Joshua over his refusal to attend church with his family and over his continued contact with Stephen, despite his father's ongoing advances toward Susan. Susan's friends also pointed to Joshua's extremely controlling behavior towards his wife and his extravagant spending habits. Joshua filed for bankruptcy in 2007, declaring over $200,000 in debts. Susan recorded a video in July 2008.
This is me, July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33 Mountain Time. Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy. And
on the morning of December 6th, 2009, Susan, Charles, and Braden attended church. A neighbor visited them at home that afternoon, leaving at about 5 p.m. This was the last time Susan was seen by someone from outside the Powell household. At first, relatives reported the entire Powell family missing on December 7th. Joshua's mother, Tarika, and his estranged sister, Jennifer Graves, went looking for them at their house shortly after being informed that the children had not been dropped off at daycare that morning. They called police after failing to make contact with Joshua or Susan. Police broke into the house, fearing the family were victims of carbon monoxide poisoning. They found no one inside, but noticed 2 box fans blowing at a wet spot on the couch. Susan did not show up at her job on December 7th. Her purse, wallet, and identification were all found inside the house. Her cell phone was later found in the family's only vehicle, a Chrysler Town and Country minivan that Joshua had been using. Later that day, at about 5 p.m., Joshua returned home with the 2 boys and was taken to the police station for questioning. He claimed he had left Susan sleeping at home shortly after midnight on December the 7th and had taken his sons on a camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in western Utah. Police visited that area on December 10th, but found no evidence of the campsite that Joshua had described. They also found it suspicious that Joshua would take his young boys out camping in blizzard conditions after midnight when they were scheduled to go to daycare just hours later. Joshua had additionally not told his boss that he would not be coming into work that day, and explained to police it was because he had thought it was Sunday rather than Monday. After a second round of police interrogation on the evening of December 8th, Joshua rented a car at Salt Lake City International Airport. His whereabouts after leaving the airport remain unknown. Around 18 hours later, at about 4 p.m. on December 9th, he called his mother from a new phone while on Interstate 84 in Tremonton, driving south toward Salt Lake City. He would later tell Jennifer Graves that he had been driving laps around the city, getting on and off freeways at random. Police would later discover that Joshua had placed an additional 807 miles on the odometer of his rental car. Upon searching the Powell residence on December 9th, investigators found traces of Susan's blood on the floor, life insurance policies on Susan for $1.5 million, and a handwritten letter from Susan expressing fear for her life. DNA test results, released in 2013, matched one blood sample with Susan, while another sample was determined to have come from an unknown male contributor. In August 2012, West Valley City Police released documents showing Joshua took actions that were regarded as highly suspicious following Susan's disappearance. He liquidated his wife's retirement accounts, canceled her regularly scheduled chiropractic sessions, and withdrew his children from daycare. He had also previously spoken to co-workers about how to hide a body in an abandoned mine shaft in the western Utah desert. Police interviewed the Powell's elder son, Charlie, who confirmed that the camping trip Joshua described took place. However, unlike his father, he stated that Susan had gone with them and did not return. Weeks after her disappearance, a teacher reported Charlie had claimed that his mother was dead. Furthermore, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, claimed that while at daycare several months after the disappearance, Braden drew a picture of a van with 3 people in it and told carers, "Mommy was in the trunk." Investigators informed the media that they planned to question Joshua again and subpoenaed all footage and interviews, aired and unaired, of Joshua from local television stations. On December 14th, Joshua retained an attorney in connection with the investigation, and police stated that he had grown increasingly uncooperative. A few days later, Joshua took his sons to Puyallup to stay with his father for the holidays. By December 24th, Joshua was considered a person of interest by investigators. On January 6, 2010, Joshua returned with his brother Michael to pack the family's belongings, indicating he was moving permanently to Puyallup. In Puyallup, Joshua occupied a home with his 2 sons, his father Stephen, his brothers Michael and John, and his sister Alina. Joshua indicated that he would rent out his house in Utah. It was reported that he returned to Puyallup after he had lost his job in West Valley City. Soon afterwards, the website susanpowell.org was launched. Described as the official website of Susan Powell, the site's anonymous entries defended Joshua as the victim of a smear campaign by Susan's family, his estranged sister Jennifer, and the LDS Church. Additional posts also speculated that Susan's disappearance was connected to that of Stephen Kuchar, a former journalist who had vanished in Nevada the same week as Susan, and that the two had run off to Brazil together. Joshua and Stephen were widely believed to have written these posts. In late 2010, both men claimed that Susan had abandoned her family due to mental illness and that she had left with another man. Susan's family rejected these claims as being unsupported by any evidence. Investigators' scrutiny extended to Stephen upon learning from a family friend that he had been obsessed with his son's wife. Computer images seized from his house in 2010 turned up 4,500 images of Susan taken without her knowledge, including close-ups of specific body parts. Police also turned their attention to Michael after learning that he had sold his broken-down Ford Taurus to a wrecking yard in Pendleton, Oregon, shortly after Susan's disappearance, and had later ordered satellite images of the lot. When police found the car, a cadaver dog indicated that decomposing human remains had been in the trunk. DNA tests on the car proved inconclusive. On September 14, 2011, Utah authorities discovered a possible gravesite while searching Topaz Mountain, a desert area near Nephi that Joshua had visited often as a campsite. There were signs of recent soil disturbance and shoveling, but after digging a few feet down, police were unable to find any remains in spite of careful sifting of the soil. Federal anthropologists also ruled out the possibility of the site being an ancient burial ground. Police continued to examine the site for a time but offered no explanation as to why they previously announced the finding of remains when none had actually been confirmed. Authorities said they were following a scent detected by their sniffer dogs. Relations between and within the Powell and Cox families became increasingly hostile. After the police raided their home in 2011, both Joshua and Stephen spoke to major news outlets regarding journals that Susan had allegedly written about the relationship between Stephen and herself. Stephen claimed that he and Susan had been falling in love prior to her disappearance, and he cited the content of the journals, written when Susan was a teenager, as evidence to support his theory that she was mentally unstable and could have run away with another man. A judge issued a permanent injunction forbidding Joshua and Stephen from publishing any material from Susan's journals, ordering the pair to either return or destroy any journals already published. On September 22nd, Stephen was arrested on charges of voyeurism and child pornography after police found evidence that he had secretly videotaped young girls and numerous women, including Susan. John Long, Assistant Attorney General for Washington State, said that Joshua was a subject in this investigation. A friend of Stephen claimed that he was preoccupied with pornography and was hung up on Susan sexually. Chuck Cox, Susan's father, filed for custody of her children the day after Stephen was arrested. A Washington court eventually granted Cox temporary custody of the boys, ruling that Joshua would have to move out of Stephen's residence if he wanted to regain custody. Joshua rented a house in South Hill, but authorities later alleged that he had never actually moved into there, merely making it appear as if he had satisfied the court's instructions while continuing to reside at Stephen's residence. In late September 2011, Jennifer Graves stated her belief that her brother Joshua was responsible for his wife Susan Powell's disappearance. His other sister, Alina, had been suspicious of him as well. However, she later withdrew her suspicions and felt that Joshua had been unduly harassed by investigators. By this time, West Valley City had spent more than $500,000 on the case. On September 28th, Mayor Mike Winder indicated that he felt that the case was worth the expense, stating, "We feel that we are getting to that tipping point where we have more hot evidence than we have had in the past 2 years, and that the case was moving forward." In late 2011, Joshua underwent a series of court-ordered evaluations in Washington. The evaluations, conducted by James Manley, determined that he had adequate parenting skills, a steady employment history, and no criminal record or history of domestic violence. However, Manley also raised issues concerning the ongoing criminal investigations. Joshua's failure to admit to normal personal shortcomings, his overbearing behavior with his sons, and his persistent defensiveness and paranoia, attributed to the police and media attention in conjunction with underlying narcissistic traits. His initial recommendation was for Joshua to have visitation with his sons several times a week, supervised by a social worker. In the last week of January 2012, West Valley City Police discovered about 400 images of simulated child pornography, bestiality, and incest on a computer seized from the Powell residence. The pornography had been cached when viewed by the previous owner of the computer, which had been purchased by Susan secondhand. Utah authorities accused Joshua of having viewed the images. The images, while not illegal due to them being in a hand-drawn or cartoonish 3D format, were cause for great concern to Manley, particularly given his earlier denial of possessing any such material. Joshua was recommended to receive a more thorough psychosexual evaluation and polygraph test, but Manley suggested no change in the visitation schedule with the Powell children. Meanwhile, Joshua's brother Michael established a Google Sites page that claimed Susan's parents were abusing and neglecting the children in collusion with child welfare authorities. He also alleged that West Valley City Police had both mishandled the investigation into Susan's disappearance and were harassing Joshua. Lawyers for the Cox family disputed the allegations, and Google removed the site after a few days due to violations of its terms of use. On February 5, 2012, social worker Elizabeth Griffin Hall called 911 after taking Charlie and Braden to a supervised visit at Joshua's house in South Hill. Hall, who was supposed to monitor the visit between Joshua and the boys, reported that Joshua grabbed his sons and would not let her through the door. Soon thereafter, the house exploded, killing Joshua and the two children. Local authorities treated the case as a double murder-suicide, saying that the act appeared to have been deliberate. When authorities notified Stephen, who was in jail, he didn't seem very upset by the news, but was angry towards authorities who notified him. 2 weeks later, Stephen invoked his Fifth Amendment right not to answer questions regarding Susan's disappearance. Cox and others have stated they believe Stephen knew what had happened to Susan. Stephen was convicted on the voyeurism charges in May 2012, in a trial which largely skirted the issue of Susan's case. After a relatively brief investigation, officials confirmed that the explosion at Joshua's house had been deliberately planned. The official cause of death for Joshua and the two boys was determined to be carbon monoxide poisoning, though the coroner also noted that both children had significant chopping injuries on the head and neck. A hatchet was recovered near Joshua's body, and investigators believe he used the tool to attack the boys before being overwhelmed by smoke and fumes. The fire investigation also found 2 5-gallon cans of gasoline on the premises, as well as evidence that gasoline had been spread throughout the house. Friends and relatives of Joshua told authorities that he had contacted them by email minutes before the incident to say goodbye. Some of them, including his local bishop, received instructions for finding his money and shutting off his utilities. Records also showed that Joshua had withdrawn $7,000 from his bank account and had donated his children's toys and books to local charities the day before the incident. Joshua named his brother Michael as the main beneficiary of his life insurance policy. Charles and Braden are buried at Woodbine Cemetery in Puyallup, Washington, which also contains a memorial for their mother. Joshua's remains were cremated. On February 11, 2013, approximately 1 year after the death of Joshua and his sons, his brother Michael killed himself in Minneapolis by jumping from the roof of a parking garage. Police had questioned Michael several times in 2012 after discovering his abandoned Ford at the Oregon Wrecking Yard. Police described him as evasive about why he left the car at that location. Utah authorities have since stated their belief that Joshua and Michael were accomplices in the murder of Susan. West Valley City Police's active investigation into Susan's disappearance was closed on May 21, 2013. In a February 2013 interview, Manley, who had conducted the 2011 to 2012 evaluations of Joshua for Washington state authorities, acknowledged his suspicions that Joshua was involved in his wife's disappearance. However, he did not mention these suspicions in his report because they were beyond the scope of his duties and because Joshua had not been charged with any wrongdoing. Jennifer Graves, Joshua's estranged sister, wrote a memoir with co-author Emily Clausen about the Powell family's tumultuous history. The memoir was published in June 2013 as A Light in Dark Places. Jennifer was inspired to write the book, she says, to help other people to recognize abuse in either their own relationships or relationships around them, because it's not always completely apparent. In March 2015, Chuck Cox won a protracted court battle with Teresa and Alina Powell over control of Susan's estate. Teresa and Alina had sought to have Susan declared legally dead to collect life insurance, but Cox ultimately gained full control of the estate. The Cox family also sued Washington's Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS, and its social workers, claiming that the agency prioritized Joshua's parental rights over the safety of Charlie and Braden, facilitating their deaths. In 2015, a federal court granted summary judgment to the defendants, ruling that the social workers had immunity and DSHS was not negligent. In 2019, an appeals court partially overturned that decision, ruling that the social workers did have immunity, but that the question of DSHS's negligence could proceed to trial. At trial, a jury ruled that DSHS was negligent and awarded $98 million to the estates of Susan's two sons. Susan's family also pressured state lawmakers in Washington and Utah to pass bills that would restrict or block visitation rights for parents being investigated for murder. Susan Powell was released from prison on July 11, 2017. After serving nearly 6 years following his voyeurism and child pornography convictions. He died of natural causes in Tacoma, Washington, on July 23, 2018. Susan remains a missing person, but given the fates of her sons, it is widely believed that she was murdered by her husband Joshua. There were calls as of March 2018 to have her declared legally dead, with the cause being homicide. In early 2022, a cave exploration crew led by Diesel Brothers personality Dave Sparks took up the challenge of searching a mine shaft in the Utah desert in search of Susan's remains. The team discovered several rib bones, possible human vertebrae, scraps of clothing, and other possible evidence of human remains in the mine shaft. The remains were sent to a lab, with DNA tests concluding that none of the bones belonged to Powell, but were instead animal remains. Pants recovered with the bones tested positive for male DNA, and the family is trying to identify the man. Please subscribe, like, or comment if you like the video.